Welcome back to the Dershow. As we all know, yesterday was the most important day in the year in any democracy, namely Election Day. I love Election Day. When I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I would always look forward to going to the local school nearby, standing online, talking to my neighbors, discussing politics, seeing people a little further away, holding posters for people I voted for, voted against. Democracy in action. And that's what Election Day is. I bemoan the fact that Election Day has lost a lot of its personality as a result of absentee voting, as a result of early voting, as a result of a range of other understandable innovations that have made Election Day less of something that's personal and something that you can see and visibly touch. Now, when you used to vote, I used to vote in Cambridge, Massachusetts with paper ballots. And today we don't have paper ballots anymore, and so we have machine voting, and machine voting is obviously subject to all kinds of changes. I have to take 1 second, please, because something's happened in a production. I cannot have the background noise. Okay, let's get back. I'm sorry. By accident, there was another program on that I was hearing, and it was getting me a little confused. And so it's off now, and I'm happy to continue with the discussion. So we had Election Day yesterday. I didn't go to the polls to vote. I vote in Florida, and so I voted by absentee ballot. I voted for losers mostly, and some winners. And let me give you my analysis of the results. Obviously, I watched the results late into the night, and I watched the results this morning, and I continued to watch them until about a minute before we got on the air. And the one thing that's clear is that nothing's clear, that we still don't know for sure who will control the House, who will control the Senate. We know that the predictions of a Republican red wave did not come true, that apparently the House, the Democrats lost fewer seats in an off-year election after a presidential election than in many, many, many years. In other words, the Democrats been much, much better than expected. We don't know, as we sit here today, whether or not the Republicans will control the House or the Democrats will control the House. There's another issue then, too. If the Republicans control the House by a narrow majority, will there be enough Republicans to elect McCarthy to be Speaker of the House? He needs to get, if it's a close division in the House, he needs to get virtually all the votes of Republicans. And there are some Republican mavericks. We saw what happened this year with at least two Republicans who served on the January 6th committee. They were hardly Republicans when it came to voting their party line. You got to give them credit for doing that. One of them lost re-election. The other wasn't running for re-election at all. So how do I analyze the results of this election? I have to tell you, I think they were a great victory for Joe Biden and for centrism and for moderation. He emerged as somebody who brought stability to the country. A lot of the candidates he endorsed won. A lot of the candidates that Donald Trump endorsed lost. Each of them had losses and wins. There's no large determining factor, but presidents. I remember I had dinner with Bill Clinton when he was president shortly before the midterm election, after the year he was elected president, and he expected and got an enormous loss in the House of Representatives. That was the Contract for America year when his agenda was stalled completely. And that's very commonly the situation. The incumbent president loses the House. And there's an institutional reason, historic reason for that as well. You know, the framers of our country did not adopt the parliamentary system. The parliamentary system There's one institution, the parliament. It makes all the decisions. There's no separation of powers. There's no checks and balances. It's parliament prevails. In England, they've introduced a little bit of judicial review, not much. It used to be until fairly recently that the essentially Supreme Court of England, the High Court, was part of the House of Lords, part of the legislation, part of the legislature. That's no longer as true. But in our country, we anticipated a situation where the president would be of one party, the House of another party, and perhaps the Senate of either the party of the House or the party of the president. And it's likely we're going to get that. We don't know for sure. We know that in Georgia, there's going to be a runoff for at least one Senate seat. So we won't know the outcome of that election until more than a month from now. That may determine whether the Senate is split 50-50, which makes it a Democratic Senate because the vice president can cast the deciding vote, or whether the Republicans can manage to get over the line and get 51 seats. We won't probably know that. We may know more of that in the next day or so, but it's likely we won't know the full answer until the runoff between the two candidates in Georgia for the Senate. The House will probably know much better. There are some very closely contested elections. Right now, the Republicans are in the lead, but do they have enough to actually take control? And as I mentioned a minute ago, does McCarthy have enough to become Speaker of the House? You don't automatically become Speaker of the House if your party wins the election. You have to then get a majority of the House, and that requires that you get an overwhelming majority of your own party, and there are those in the party who will negotiate with him. And I think in the end, if the Republicans have a majority in the House, McCarthy will probably become the Speaker with some deals made behind the scenes. Is there any general conclusion one can draw from yesterday's election? Again, it's not over. There could be some surprises, but in general, extremists lost. In general, Republicans who were election deniers did not have as much success as more moderate Republicans. Of course, there were some election deniers who won, and there were some extremists on the Republican side who won, and there were some extremists on the Democrat side who won. But in contested elections, I think the message was that Americans would like to move closer to the center and away from extremes, either left or right. And that's why, in this respect, whatever you might think of President Biden and whatever you might think of his cognitive abilities, and I've known him for 42 years, and I haven't seen any major change in his cognitive abilities. But whatever you might think, I think it's fair to say he is a president for the times, because he is a person who unites more than divides. He is not an extremist. He is not somebody who appeals to extremist voters. The people on the hard left of the Democratic Party don't like him, unlike President Trump, who the people on the extreme right of the Republican Party did like. President Trump was a divisive factor, and I think President Biden is a uniting factor. There are many things that Biden is doing and has done that I fundamentally disagree with, and there are many things that Trump did that I fundamentally agree with. But in terms of leading the country at this time, we are more divided than at any time in my adult life. And I lived through the Vietnam War, which was a very divisive time on university campuses and on the streets. But I think the country is more divided now than ever. People just can't have conversations. And President Biden today in his press conference, by the way, I urge you to watch, if you can see a replay of his press conference. I thought he was quite good. He talked about conversations becoming more normal. He thought that we were moving a little bit in that direction. Well, if there are conversations at all, that's become a big deal. As I said before, today we couldn't, on most college campuses, have the Lincoln Douglas debates. Last night, actually, I spoke at Columbia Law School to a group of both Columbia Law students and undergraduate students sponsored by the Federalist Society. we had a very interesting debate with another professor, a professor from Columbia Law School, and the debate was over Roe versus Wade and whether the overruling of Roe versus Wade constituted judicial activism. I'm not going to get into the merits of the debate, except it was an extraordinary debate. Both sides were really good. We talked to each other. At one point, my opponent persuaded me of something, and I admitted that I hadn't known that, and I was persuaded. Students asked terrific, terrific questions, and I ended the debate by saying what a remarkable moment in modern American history this was. I'm not sure this debate could have occurred in many universities at Berkeley or at Harvard or at Yale or at other places. It was sponsored by the Federalist Society, which is more conservative than I am, but is open to speakers of all points of view, and they've contributed a lot to dialogue. And so the debate went forward, and it was an excellent debate. I think everybody who came over, people on the right, people on the left, people who were Democrats, people who were Republicans, all said, "Wow, it was a good conversation," and it was nuanced. There was no shouting, there was no name calling, there was no insults. I go back again to the time that I defended President Trump on the floor of the Senate and made a constitutional argument, which the vast majority of scholars would have agreed with had I made it on behalf of Hillary Clinton, namely that to impeach a president requires either a crime, treason, bribery, or criminal type behavior akin to treason and bribery. That's the meaning of or other high crimes and misdemeanors. That would have been an interesting debate. Nobody, not a single academic, was prepared to debate me on that issue. They were prepared to call me names. They were prepared to stop talking to me. They were prepared to yell at me. They were prepared to insult me. Professor Lawrence Tribe called the argument bonkers. I guarantee you, if the same argument was made on behalf of Hillary Clinton, he would have been in support of the argument. He probably would have made it himself. But that's the nature of academia today. No debates, just bumper stickers and screaming and yelling and insulting and choosing sides. And, if you're on the wrong side, you're on the wrong side. In fact, some of the people who were most upset at the decision yesterday by my accuser to finally admit that she may have made a mistake in identifying me, the people who were most upset were people who hated me for defending Trump. Now, they had no idea whether I was innocent or guilty. They just hoped I was guilty because I was on the wrong side of the Trump issue. I surely should be on the wrong side of this issue as well. And, that's become a real serious problem in America. If you're on the wrong side of a political issue, then people think you're on the wrong side of every issue. So, what's the message to the Democrats and the Republicans? I think the message is nominate moderates. Biden, in his press conference today, didn't announce that he was going to run, but he said he wanted to run, and subject to discussions with his family, he's going to run. I think yesterday's election results probably inclined him in the direction of running. He was asked who would make a stronger candidate, DeSantis or Trump, and his answer was, "Well, I'm anxious to see them go after each other." I don't know whether DeSantis would run against Trump. He certainly positioned himself as the alternative to Trump if Trump doesn't run. And obviously, as you know from the Constitution, he can't run with Trump. There can't be a Trump DeSantis ticket, it would be a good ticket. But it can't happen under the Constitution because the Constitution provides that electors cannot vote for two people, for electors from a state cannot vote for two people from the state. So if Trump and DeSantis ran, that ticket would lose all of the Florida electoral votes. Florida being the third largest state, or the second, I don't remember, but it's way up there. So no party would ever nominate two people from the same state and lose the electors from that state. And so I don't know who's going to get the Republican nomination. I would think that Trump would have looked at yesterday's results and shaken his head a little bit and said, maybe not. And I think that anybody looking at today's press conference would also say that, although we have 2 years to go, Biden is not senile. Biden is not mentally disturbed. Biden is a very, very decent, strong candidate who beat Trump legitimately, both in the popular vote and the electoral vote. and I think would beat him again legitimately, depending on the health, obviously, of both of the candidates. They're both among the oldest people who have ever served and run for uh, president, and that's a factor. But I think the population is aging. The population is getting older. It probably hasn't been until recently that an 84-year-old guy like me would be having a podcast and having to speak for what 20 minutes spontaneously without notes about complex subjects. But I think age, 80 is the new 60, and 70 is the new 50. So I would not be surprised if I had to bet widows and orphans money that couldn't be lost, on what the tickets will be in 2024. I would say the smart money would be on Trump versus Biden, and then the smart money would be on Biden winning a second term. I don't know the answer to that. I think the Democrats would be foolish and would shoot themselves in the foot if they regained control of this House and Senate and tried to disqualify Trump from running on the grounds of the 14th Amendment, that he led an insurrection or something like that. I think that just plays into the hands of Trump and makes him a hero and makes his base even more anxious. I would be strongly opposed to that. I want my constitutional right to vote against Trump. I don't want him disqualified. I want him to run so I can vote against him for the third time. Uh, Anything could happen in the next 2 years, and it's really the next year, because a year from now we'll already be into the presidential election season, certainly 15 or 16 months from now. So we'll see what happens. I think the lesson of the current election is both parties should stay away from extremism. Both parties should try to marginalize the extremists. Both parties suffer from extremism. I think Democrats across the country lose votes because of the Ilhan Omars and the AOCs and people like that. And I think that Republicans lose votes because of the Greens and others who are extremists within the party. Americans are centrist people. That's why Biden won the election. Centrist people, they're people who have always rejected extremes. Again, one bit of history. In the 1920s and 1930s, all through Europe, the countries were divided between communists and fascists. There were wars, obviously. In Spain, the fascists fought the communists. In France, the fascists ran against the communists. Germany, we know what happened. The fascists won. The United States was not afflicted by that dichotomy. In the United States, there were fascists. They lived just a few blocks away from where I live now in Yorkville, Second Avenue in the 70s or 80s. They had Nazi events in Madison Square Garden where people did Heil Hitler salutes and proudly proclaimed their allegiance to the fascist and to the Nazi party. We had supporters of Mussolini in this country. And we had communists, of course. We had people on the left. We had a communist from my neighborhood who was a member of Congress. And so there were extremists, but the country wasn't extremism. The country elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt ended the Depression and brought about the New Deal. And he saved capitalism through, I wouldn't say socialism, it wasn't socialism, but a movement in the direction of welfare, in the direction of Social Security, in the direction of fair labor laws. He moved the country left-ish to avoid it moving all the way to the left, which would have provoked a tremendous amount of support for people on the right. So the American history has been a history of rejecting extremism, even during the period where slave owners and abolitionists were fighting, and those were extreme positions. The end result were compromises in the Constitution, legislative compromises. Ultimately, that issue couldn't be compromised, and a war was fought, the worst war in the history of the United States. More Americans were killed on the North and the South during the Civil War than in any other war before or since. So there are some issues that can't be compromised, but in general, Americans are a compromising people. And Joe Biden represents that compromising nature. He can cross party lines, and he can negotiate with people on the other side. Many on the hard left criticize him for having done so, and he has done so. And some on the hard right criticize both him and members of the Republican Party who have made compromises. But I think that's the American way. And if I were the head of the Republican National Committee, or if I were the head of the Democratic National Committee, I would be now moving toward trying to create a ticket for 2024 with a moderate president, moderate vice president, and moderate members of the House and the Senate running together. Now, one question that's going to be very interesting, maybe we'll spend a half an hour discussing it one day, is if Joe Biden runs, and I think he will if he's healthy, will he keep his vice president? Because I think everybody at that point will say whoever the vice president is for a second term, Biden, is very likely to become president because the demographics and the statistics show that living to the age that would end a second Biden term is statistically less likely than the opposite. So just like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he nominated vice president and changed his vice president from Wallace to Truman in the 44 election, he knew that whoever was the vice president would become the president, because although he was only in his 60s, he had terrible, terrible health conditions, including extraordinary high blood pressure, to which he eventually succumbed only a year into his presidency. And so I think there's going to be a lot of debate among Democrats as to who the vice president should be. I don't think Joe Biden is going to kick her off the ticket, but it would not surprise me to find that she gets a really good position and has no choice but to take it. Maybe even on the Supreme Court of the United States. She is, after all, a lawyer and a prosecutor, or some other position, a high cabinet position, so that it could be perceived as a promotion rather than a demotion. Everybody would know what it really was. So I don't know who the vice president on the Democratic side will be. And let's assume Trump does run. I don't know who the vice president on the Republican side would be, because again, he'd be quite old. Would it be Nikki Haley? She's young and vibrant and represents a more centrist approach to the party. What if DeSantis is the nominee? Who would he nominate to be the vice president? These are interesting and difficult issues. And the election yesterday, I think, bore on all these issues. So I'm interested in your views. I know that the Rumble people will say, we stopped listening the minute you said that the press conference by Joe Biden was good and that he's the president for the time. I know that. But the YouTube listeners probably will have a more rational approach. So speaking of that, let's turn to letters. Remember yesterday I spoke about the accusation against me and the admission by the accuser that she may have misidentified me. First question, how much did you pay her? Nothing, not a penny, not a single penny, nothing, nothing at all. Okay, but nobody seems to believe that. There's a lot of letters ask me the same question. These are, again, all the Rumble letters. And then here's another one. If she misidentified me, it must have been, and this is from the letter, this is from RYIRM, must have been some other hook-nosed Jew. Well, thank you for expressing your anti-Semitism in a way that's so obvious to everybody. Next one. She may have erred, but those recognizing you are an Israel first depraved Zionist are on the money. It's the Benjamins, baby. That's why I'm a Zionist. I've been a Zionist since I'm less than 10 years old. I went to Camp Masad, a Hebrew-speaking Zionist camp in 1948, the year Israel was established, and the counselor of my division was Noam Chomsky, who himself was a Zionist in those days. Yeah, I'm a Zionist. I'm a proud Zionist. I'm critical of every government, including the Israeli government, but I am a proud Zionist. Okay, interesting. Have you recognized that you erred in defaming Mastriano by accusing him of anti-Semitism? No, I haven't. Thankfully, Mastriano lost overwhelmingly, ironically, to a Jewish candidate who sent his children to Jewish day school, and it was anti-Semitic to criticize him for doing that, and also for associating and paying money to and receiving money from overtly anti-Semitic groups. So he's a perfect example. Mastriani is an extremist, an election denier, and he went down to defeat. It wasn't even a close race, and that's what the Republicans are going to get if you nominate people like Mastriano. Mastriano does not deserve to belong on the ticket of a great party, the Republican Party, and the American people and the people of Pennsylvania told the Republicans so in no uncertain terms. The Republicans could have won that race. They, came very, very close in the Senate race, but they're not going to come close if they have a bigot like Mastriano running for governor. So I'm glad he lost. Does Alan Dershowitz think Gouffre may also have made a mistake when she accused Prince Andrew? I have no idea. It's a big difference. I mean, nobody can confuse Prince Andrew. Nobody could create a case of mistaken identification with Prince Andrew. I think he was very, very well known. I was not. And remember, this goes back to 2000 and 2001. Some 17 or 18-year-old probably never heard of me, probably didn't know who I was, probably wasn't watching whatever channels I was on those days. So I don't think my case says anything directly about Prince Andrew. I have said I don't think Prince Andrew should have settled this case. I think he could have won the case, and I suspect Mommy told him to settle it, and I think he made a big mistake in doing so. Next question. She didn't say you didn't do it, but that she may be wrong. She received $16 million from Prince Andrew. I can't confirm that. The accusations has not been put to rest. Why aren't you suing? Well, I did. I sued her. She has acquired a lot of money. She might have made a mistake by identifying Prince Andrew. You called her a liar, and now you're letting her off the hook. Everyone I know who has accused you say you paid her off. Well, you can say whatever you want. You can also say I went on Jeffrey Epstein's airplanes with her. Obviously, the manifests prove exactly the opposite. Or that I was on her island when she was there. No, I wasn't, and the travel records prove the opposite. Or that I was at his ranch. No, the travel records prove the opposite. You can say I paid her off. What did I do? Pay her in cash? She lives in Australia. There are records of every payment made all the time. I guarantee you I did not pay her a penny, never would pay her a penny. And but you can continue to believe anything you want. You're conspiracy theorists, and that's the problem in America today. People believe things without there being any evidentiary support. Dershowitz's name is on Epstein's flight log. How many times? 0 with any young women or Virginia Gouffre. 0, 0, 0. I was his lawyer. The legal team flew on his plane with just men and lawyers. So yes, I was on his flight log a couple of them, not nearly as many times as Bill Clinton, and not merely as many times as other people. And every trip is documented, and I can prove where I was going, who I was going, and who was on the plane. The manifests show who was on the plane, and they conclusively show that I was never on the plane or never, ever in proximity to the woman who accused me. And she's essentially, her statement does not contradict that. Okay, this is a silly one. I'm going to skip this one. So happy for you and your family. A mistake? Now the media needs to correct this injustice. Well, the media has done a pretty good job in reporting on this, but I'm happy to, within the constraints of what I'm allowed to say anything. What I want to say is I want all the records, every single deposition, every single flight manifest, every single video, every single tape recording released. I hereby waive my right of privacy to anything. I want everything out there. I don't want anything kept secret. I don't want anything suppressed. I want everything out there because I have nothing to hide. And the people who generally, when people want to keep things secret, there's a good reason for it. They have something to hide. I do not. I never believe the accusation, says Catherine. We live at a time when people are accused of terrible things, even decades after the alleged incident, without the accuser showing credible evidence. It boggles the mind that people are so susceptible to believe such accusations and that someone's reputation can be ruined by unfounded charges. I think that's right, and fortunately, I was able to fight those charges and bring about the result that was brought about yesterday. What I would like to know is which of Gouffre's legal team persuaded her to include the professor's name. They knew Alan was innocent and switched the names around from Gouffre's previous story. Well, I know who they were. They were two lawyers. And this is all a matter of record. Her best friend testified and have a tape recording in which they indicate that she was pressured by her lawyers to name me, and I know who the two lawyers are. I would like to be able to disclose their names. One of them is a former judge, and but I'm a bit constrained. I don't think I'm constrained in naming them because they're not part of the lawsuit, but they appear all over the testimony. And when the testimony becomes public, so much more will be known about this case, and fingers of blame will be appropriately appointed at the people who are responsible for what could have been a terrible miscarriage of justice. But I have to give credit to Virginia Gouffre for coming forward finally after too many years, but finally acknowledging that she may have made a mistake in identifying me. So thank you for doing that. And that ended the case for me. And going on to do other things, make more enemies, attack more people, defend more civil liberties, and provoke more controversies on this podcast. So I'll see you next week.